All right, so I'm really excited to bring to you a paper from Dr. David Rudolph. We'll look at his credentials in just a moment, that appeared in Kesher, a journal of Messianic Judaism, on August 17th, 2022, so relatively recent as far as papers go. He also wrote another one, which is about 90% the same paper. So it was for a different format a year earlier, called One New Man, Hebrew Roots Replacement Theology. So I'm going to grab a couple of quotes from this later on. I'm not using this article because it's not easily available online, and I wanted to interact with an article that you can see the website that it's on. You can go there, you can read it for yourself. Real easy. So that's the one that I'm going to focus on. Both versions are excellent, have lots of good points. And so let's take a look at Dr. David Rudolph. He's the program director of Messianic Jewish Studies and a professor of New Testament and Jewish Studies at King's University, PhD from Cambridge. All right, Gordon Conwell. This is someone with a lot of experience, and he's got a quote that we're going to look at about that in a minute, in this field, right? An expert in this field, someone who has spent a lot of time studying these issues, and talking about these issues, and so we should take that viewpoint quite seriously, and look at it. So I'm going to be looking at this through the Word versions because I've got it highlighted so that we can all see, but it is exactly this same article. I'll pop back to the footnotes from time to time because we're going to look at those as well. There's some really important footnotes in here. So let me hop over to the Word version. Here is the beginning of the article. I'm going to do about the first 6 pages here in part 1. There'll be a couple more parts to come because this is the opening and the primary introductory part of the paper. So let's begin. Let's dive in. I'm not going to obviously read the whole thing. I'm highlighting some things, not because other stuff's not important, but it's not necessarily on point with the conversation we're having about First Fruits of Zion in particular. This is more, of course, also about the larger Hebrew Roots movement. But there's a lot here that's excellent. Like I said, go read the paper for yourself, front to back. It will benefit you. So here is the question off the bat. How are these life-changing decisions made? So he's talking about the tens of thousands of Gentiles who have joined the Messianic movement one way, shape, or form, right? Either they've joined a Messianic Jewish synagogue, or they've joined a Hebrew Roots movement group, or some such thing, right? He's asking, how are their decisions about that being made? What are the motivations? What principles guide the Gentile believers' approach to observing Jewish traditions? That's an excellent question, right? On what basis are these decisions being made? Biblical ones, we would hope, right? Ones that are healthy, ones that are good for the body of Christ. Look at his next quote. It says, Hebrew Roots 1 law will be explained below. For now, think in terms of slogans. And I've heard these, I'm sorry, I'll pause from time to time in the middle of a quote. I've heard these slogans, right? I've heard them in First Fruits of Zion has said almost these exact same words in many different places. I've seen them in the comment section on my videos all the time. So he's right, nailing it on the head by talking about sort of this is the feeling of this movement. We should walk in the way of the master who kept Torah. I don't know how many times I've heard that. They are not Jewish festivals. They're God's festivals, God's appointed times, right? Oh, how many times have I heard that? The church's days of worship are pagan. I've heard some pretty awful things said about Christmas and Easter and Sunday worship. We should be celebrating God's feast today since everyone will be doing so in the future. Again, First Fruits of Zion talks about that future aspect all the time. So Dr. Rudolph is right on point here. He knows he's hitting these groups. He's got the feel for them. This popular way of thinking among non-Jews in the Messianic movement and our lack of addressing it in a consistent way as Messianic Jewish leaders has naturally and unintentionally resulted in Judaizing Gentiles. Again, I'm not a part of that movement. I'm certainly not a leader in the Messianic Jewish movement. I'm an American Baptist pastor and a Gentile, so I can't speak to that. But I do know that there's a lot of confusion. There are a lot of people who don't understand, who are not sure, who are grabbing teaching from this person on the internet and that person on the internet and First Fruits of Zion. And so certainly this topic needs to be addressed more. Dr. Rudolph's paper is one piece of that puzzle. He's going to make reference to some other sources as well that I've also talked about previously. So here's our first footnote, number 2. So let's grab footnote number 2 and see what it says. He says, Judaizing is defined here as encouraging Gentile Christians to take on Jewish-specific customs, especially those that have been historically regarded as Jewish boundary markers of identity. In other words, the seventh-day Sabbath, the festivals, the dietary laws, because it is God's will or ideal to do so. Again, so there's a spectrum there, right? And he's going to talk about that. We're going to look at 3 different versions of the Hebrew roots attitude here in this part 1. And there's a spectrum between it's required, it's demanded, it's the ideal, it's important, you should, you could, you would, there's a lot of spectrum here. And so we will no doubt look at that nuance as we go. So let's look on to page 2. Here's the next quote. He says, as a Messianic Jew who's been actively involved in the Messianic movement for over 45 years, and works as a professor of New Testament and Jewish studies at a Christian university. So not only does he have the credentials, the education, the position at the university, he's been a part of this movement for almost as long as I've been alive. He knows it, right? So very important to weigh what I say, weigh what Dr. Rudolph says, weigh what anyone says against the Word of God and with the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So the aim of this article is to argue that we should avoid the aforementioned extremes. Hebrew roots one law on one end of the spectrum and replacement theologies and instead work toward realizing Paul's Ephesians 2 vision of the one new man. We'll get into that more in subsequent parts as he gets to the body of the article. It's really the thing that's driving and motivating what he has to say here. And he spent a lot of time, thinking about it and writing about it. So we certainly will get into that. That one new man, continuing, there's a comma and it jumps down for some reason on the article as well. Made up of Jews and Gentiles in Messiah who affirm each other in their respective identities and as brothers and sisters in the Lord. So amen to that. And then the next line, Hebrew roots, one law, and replacement theologies represent departures from Paul's one new man vision in opposite directions. And so his chart here is an interesting one, right? That the one new man is what the Apostle Paul teaches. And again, we'll look at that more later. And the Hebrew roots movement, the one law movement, is basically saying that we're all supposed to be some kind of Jew, some kind of Israelite, right? To one degree or another. And then replacement theology is erasing that. Again, I have been accused many times and without merit of being a replacement theologian when I have never taught anything of the sort. I have always taught, and I was raised under this understanding in my own Baptist church growing up, and as a Baptist minister, I've always taught that God's promises to Israel are irrevocable, that they are always his chosen people, and that, as Paul says, the broken branch can be grafted back in. And so we're trying to avoid those two extremes, and it's interesting that he is painting them as opposite directions away from scriptural teaching. So interesting. We'll take a look as we go. Here is the next page. It says, as in a marriage, the two become one and yet remain distinctly two. The one new man represents the reconciliation of Jew and Gentile in Messiah and the grand vision to build God's holy temple together. So he's talking about something there that I have noticed is missing from First Fruits of Zion theology, and that is, of course, that now the holy temple of God. It's not a physical structure. It's not a building. It's not a geographic place anymore. It's a people. And that people, it's not just the Jewish people, it's Gentile followers of Jesus as well, together as one holy temple, certainly. So I'm definitely with him there. All right, the next quote. The Jerusalem Council decided that Gentile believers were exempt from circumcision and ipso facto other boundary markers of Jewish identity. However, the four requirements in Acts 15, 20, and 28 to 29, and Paul's letters demonstrate that Gentile believers were expected to keep universal Torah ethics. So there's two ideas there, right? Now, he is looking at the Jerusalem Council and Acts 15 in the opposite direction from First Fruits of Zion. First Fruits of Zion teaches that the Jerusalem Council, by putting those four requirements there, were assuming that other Torah observance requirements would be taught to the Gentile followers of Jesus in the synagogues, in the diaspora. Right? Because again, First Fruits of Zion doesn't believe there is a church in the New Testament. They don't believe there is any gathering of the followers of Jesus outside of the synagogues and the temple in Jerusalem in the New Testament. Again, I've demonstrated by studying Acts and put that out there, video series on that that's just not true. Notice that he's looking at that quite different. When they say you're exempt from circumcision, it means you're exempt from all the rest. And First Fruits of Zion has gone to great lengths to try to say that circumcision is separated out. All right, Paul is all for all of the rest of Torah observance. Again, the law of Moses being incumbent upon Gentiles, it's just circumcision that's separate. And this is not what we're hearing, not what we're seeing at all from Dr. Rudolph. He's saying that circumcision is the one that stands for all of the rest of them. And again, that's how the church has always understood it. And now as we're seeing the new, the different teaching from these Hebrew roots groups. Let's take a look at the next quote. And here at the top it says, circumcision is the metonymy for Jewish identity and lifestyle. Again, that goes back to his last comment, right? Circumcision, when that word is used, typically in the New Testament, sometimes it's literally talking about just that one thing, but often it stands for all of the rest of them. It means Jewish identity. It's the one thing that has that sort of symbolic value above all of the other ones. And then the next sentence is talking about Jewish life in Christ. Again, not my place. I've not claimed to speak to that. Obviously, Dr. Rudolph has his own view on that. And we will certainly respect that. Not going to worry about that either way. Notice what he says about Gentiles. If you are Gentile, stay Gentile. Do not stop being Gentile, i.e. don't take on Jewish identity and lifestyles. This is Paul's rule, not just in Corinth, but in all of his congregations. And again, with his footnotes, he develops this argument and shows you more articles, more teaching on the subject. So please read this and study it yourself if the topic interests you to look further. Here at the bottom it says, the Hebrew roots one law viewed leads to the erasure of Gentile identity in the body of Messiah, since Jewish life is for everyone. This means that all churches should ideally look like Messianic synagogues. The replacement theology view moves in the opposite direction. Instead of erasing Gentile identity, it erases Jewish identity within the ecclesia. And of course, that's a problem in either direction, right? And that's what he is warning against. I have not found replacement theology to be all that popular in churches, at least in America today, in the kinds of churches that I have contact with. The thing that we primarily see is people replacing the promises or sort of co-opting the promises, the national promises of Israel, and putting them on America in a form of nationalism, not taking them from Israel, but basically saying we can borrow them too. We're also a chosen nation kind of thing. And certainly I've been consistent in teaching about that. Long before I ever heard of Torah clubs, I was warning against that idea. So let's keep going. And here we have a useful footnote, number 17. So we'll jump down to the footnote number 17. It says, we might say that the Hebrew roots, one law, and replacement theologies are two sides of the same coin. One leads to one new Jew and the other to one new Gentile. I found that fascinating because First Fruits of Zion is making that exact same argument now. Recently they started making it as well. I don't know if they got that from him, from this paper, or they just independently came upon it. But as we will see, they're using it to say, we're not either one of those. Dr. Rudolph is going to tell us, that's not really true. Not true at all. We've got some excellent quotes coming up from him along those lines. So let's keep going. Under his chart, right? Here's the chart that the Jerusalem Council affirms the Jewish and Gentile calling of interdependence and mutual blessing. It's a fascinating topic, and I would say that well-meaning and faithful followers of Jesus Christ can have slightly different understandings of what this one new man theology means, and live in fellowship with each other and not be at each other's throats about it. What is an issue, of course, is the replacement theology that basically says God's promises to Abraham's descendants are no more. Forget that, not true, never was true. And then the Hebrew roots, one law, that basically says we're all, one way or another, right? Part of Israel, part of we're all Jewish in some way or other. There's some very extreme versions of that and some more diet versions of it, but they're both going in those opposite directions. Notice the next quote. Hebrew roots, one law theologies are now widespread in the Messianic movement and the Gentile wing of the church. I've seen some statistics, some estimates as to how much of the Messianic movement is made up of Gentiles who are somewhere on this Hebrew roots spectrum. It's a lot. There's no way to know how accurate those kinds of stats are. It's definitely a concern there. And it's a growing concern in the church, in the Gentile church. This movement is growing in its many different facets, especially online, through groups that form online, through YouTube, and other things like that. So it's a growing concern. It may not be on the radar of your local church pastor yet, but it will be. And I'm, trying to get out in front of that curve, trying to warn people before it's on their doorstep, before it's in their church, so that a pastor, if someone comes up to the pastor and says, hey, I found this Torah club, it's all about, the books of Moses, yada, yada, yada. Can we put these pamphlets out here at the church? I want him to be able to Google, okay, who are First Fruits of Zion? What's a Torah club? And see something that they didn't produce, which of course would be mine or Professor Solberg's or anybody else really who is going to say, you're going to want to look at this a little more closely before you answer. So let's keep going. There's a bunch of quotes in the next section. It says, teaching about the meaning of Israel's festivals and encouraging all Gentile Christians to observe them are two different things. Restoration of what has been lost does not mean the church should become a synagogue. We ought not swing the pendulum from one extreme, de-Judaizing Yeshua, to another extreme, Judaizing all who follow him. Absolutely right. I have no issue, no problem with a congregation learning about a Passover Seder, right? Learning about the festivals, learning about what kosher eating is, learning about what Sabbath observance is, what it was in the time of Moses, what it was in the time of David, what it was in the time of Christ, what it is in Judaism today, right? No issue with any of that. That is a very different thing from saying in some way that Gentile followers of Jesus should or must do these things because they're an ideal, because they're permanent and eternal, and et cetera, right? And so he sees the distinction, and I definitely would agree with that. All right, so we've got three kinds in his view of Hebrew roots views of the law of Moses. So Dr. Rudolph is going to call them hard, soft, and partial. That's what we're going to look at today, these three views, and that'll be the end of this section. So hard one law maintains that there is one Torah that applies to Jew and Gentiles in the same way. Right? That's typically referred to as one law theology. He's saying it's a little more subtle than that. There's hard one law, soft one law, and partial one law. And I very much appreciate his analysis here because there is a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of confusion about these terms, and I like the way that he has described them. So he says the hard one law folk regard Christians who violate these commandments as workers of lawlessness. Hard one law proponents view the church as apostate. And again, I've seen both of those things from First Fruits of Zion, talking about people who do not observe Torah as lawless, people who do not, and I have, of course, seen and demonstrated many times the way in which they are hostile to the church, their antipathy toward the church, seeing it as a vast mission field for them. So let's pause there and grab number 19. Footnote number 19. Hey, look what it is. R.L. Solberg, Torahism. Are Christians required to keep the law of Moses? And Dr. Rudolph says that Professor Solberg offers a helpful response to the hard one law view of Christmas and Easter, the divinity of Yeshua, and the Trinity. And I second that. Here's my copy of Torahism, and of course I did that discussion with Professor Solberg and Pastor Harris back in June. Nice to see that Dr. Rudolph has read Professor Solberg's book and is familiar with it. You see that footnote number 20 is also from the same book. I would also recommend that book if you want to learn more about this subject. Professor Solberg's book is excellent as well. So let's keep going with, we were at 19. It says, since the hard one law view is suspicious of church teaching, this sometimes leads to a reassessment of the divinity of Yeshua, the triunity of God, and the trustworthiness of Paul's writings. Oh, let's take a look, right? In the Logos, I just did the two-part on the Logos, which is a Torah Club series, part of a Torah Club series. We saw, right, that the divinity of Yeshua was brought into question, primarily by denying the hypostatic union and making the Logos, the divinity that Jesus of Nazareth had, something he's never aware of, something he never utilizes. We definitely saw them deny the Trinity, right? We saw subordinationism and we saw modalism in many examples in that one chapter. We have seen them be suspicious of church teaching. How do I know they're suspicious of church teaching? They never use it, right? They're never interacting with, and I've said this many times, I still haven't seen any examples, right? They're never interacting with Augustine and Aquinas and Calvin and Luther and all of the rest, even if they were going to disagree with them in various parts, because I don't agree with any of those guys 100%. You would still interact with them. You would still use their teaching. And so, again, I've seen exactly what he's talking about here. And this last one, the trustworthiness of Paul's writings. First Fruits of Zion doesn't do that. They basically have redefined everything Paul wrote so that it means the opposite of what you think it means. So they're not saying Paul's untrustworthy. They're saying for the entire 2,000-year history of the church has not understood Paul properly. But I have seen that in the comment section of my videos and Professor Solberg's videos. I have seen plenty of people who don't listen to the Apostle Paul, right? Who basically call the Apostle Paul part of the problem. So again, this is an excellent analysis of the Hebrew roots movement. He started with hard-won law, right? The most zealous, the ones that have gone the furthest on this spectrum away from orthodoxy. Soft-won law is going to be a step closer, but still far from orthodoxy. So let's see what that says. Soft-won law is the same as hard-won law in its theological vision that Gentile Christians should live like Jesus. And again, we're going to talk about this a little bit more because he's got some quotes. I've said this before. When First Fruits of Zion left, quote unquote, left behind hard-won law theology in 2012 after they got rid of Tim Hegg, they didn't really leave it, because the theological vision hasn't changed at all. The foundational beliefs are all still there. It's just the application that has changed. All right, and he sees that as well, that there's still have a vision of Gentile Christians living as Jews in one way, shape, or form. He says it's typically a reaction to seeing too much craziness in the Hebrew roots movement. And I shared with you that video or that article where Boaz Michael and Daniel Lancaster are saying that between 2009 and 2012, they realized that what they were building was crazy and it was getting everybody at each other's throats and it was a whole mess. So they were going to back away from it a step. Right? I like what he says there. You can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. So instead of the hard-won law teaching, you replace it with soft-won law teaching. Not because you've changed your view, but because you realize that absolutist way of talking about it just gets people mad. Right? It just causes fights and arguments, and so you've got to try something else. Soft-won law teachers aim to be non-judgmental even as they seek to see all Christians embrace Jewish life. And again, that is an actual, I showed you that from the Torah Club Leaders Manual, right? That they have said, we will never talk about our critics by name. We will only talk about ideas. We're not going to be judgmental. But they're still pushing this, right? They're still pushing this. So let's take a look at his chart down here. Hard-won law uses things like command, require, and have to. Soft uses ideas like ideal, God desires, you ought to. So it's the difference between have to and ought to. In the end, right, they're a difference of degree, not a difference of kind. Right? Because if true discipleship is wanting to live like Jesus, in other words, follow Torah in their mind, then it's not optional for anyone, right? Unless you want to be a poor disciple. So you've softened the image, you've softened the terminology, you haven't really changed. Whereas he would say, again, echoing Messianic Judaism's, again, it's not a monolith, but the primary attitude of Messianic Judaism is that such things are allowed, free to, and may. But they're not questions of righteousness. They're not a necessity for discipleship. They don't get you closer to God as a Gentile, right? That's the big difference here. So we're almost there. We've got one more section and then a couple of really useful quotes. Soft-won law, we're still on soft-won law. Soft-won law advocates sometimes combine the language of columns 2 and 3 in the above chart or equivalents to make their pitch more palatable. For example, Boaz Michael and D. Thomas Lancaster do this in the Torah Club commentary, Depths of the Torah. And we will take a look at the footnote that this is pulled from in a minute to learn about when that was published. But here he's name-dropping Boaz Michael and D. Thomas Lancaster and saying they're not necessarily hard anymore. They're soft-won law now, but they're still mixing in that old terminology. So let's take a look at the quote from Depths of the Torah. This is one Torah Club commentary I don't have, so I have not studied this one, but it's a very familiar kind of quote. So this whole section is an extended quote, including the title. Why would I if I don't have to? Even though we do not teach that Gentile disciples have a mandate to keep the Torah, again, not anymore, remember, that's a change from 2012, in the same manner as Jewish believers, we encourage Gentile disciples to take on the commandments as they are able. We push the envelope and choose to err on the side of obedience to God. Is that a loaded statement if you ever heard one? There is life and reward in God's commandments. That's true, but you mean by commandments, you mean Torah observant, not in general. The more we apply the commandments, the more life we experience. The more a Gentile believer aligns his life with Torah, the more relevant the scriptures become for him. Obedience to Torah offers blessing. Which pause, right? That's a bit of a replacement theology, isn't it, Mr. Lancaster and Mr. Boaz Michael? Because you're saying that Gentiles can have blessings that were given to Jews. I don't believe that. I don't believe those blessings or those curses in the law of Moses have anything to do with anyone other than ancient Israel, because we're not a party to the covenant. Anyway, continuing, our master says, whoever does even the least of the commandments and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven, Matthew 5:19. That whoever includes the Gentile believer. There's some contextual conversation to have there. Therefore, we tell Gentile believers, there is blessing in the whole of Torah. Keep it all, live it all, but do not condemn other Gentile believers who are not keeping all the same particulars. That statement at the end doesn't really work, right? If it's God's blessings for everyone, then you really ought to keep it. The quote continues, however, one might ask, if a Gentile believer does not have a divine mandate to keep the particulars of Torah specifically associated with Jewish expression, why would he bother with them? Why keep a Sabbath at all? Why trouble oneself with the fixing of mezuzah or keeping a kosher diet? Excellent question, right? Because I've read them say things like, well, some of us are called to it. Sometimes the Spirit is telling you to do it. And they ask the question, well, what if that's not you? Well, here's their answer. Beyond the general promises of blessing and reward, again, they're not our blessings, they're not our rewards. We find several compelling reasons for Gentile Torah observance. Here they are. 1, love for God. It's kind of important. 2, discipleship to Yeshua. 3, kingdom expression. 4, return to apostolic era practice. Not true. 5, solidarity with greater Israel. All right, so again, they're using the softer language of one law, but you can see the teaching is pretty much still the same. It has that same vision and belief. We're going to pause in the middle of this for a moment, because now we're back to Dr. Rudolph here at the start with while someone. That's the end of the quote. Well, let's look at footnote number 23, because these footnotes are super helpful. Number 23, Boaz Michael, D. Thomas Lancaster, One Law and the Messianic Gentile in the Depths of Torah, 2017. So that's after they supposedly left one law behind in 2012. They've softened the message, but it's still a one law vision. He continues. He says, the publication notes that it was updated and revised from the original article published in Messiah Journal 101. My impression is that Michael and Lancaster since 2017, and this is what I've said, have moved more toward a partial one law view. However, the same kind of mixed messaging can be found in recent First Fruits of Zion publications. The Holy Days by Lancaster in 2021, Christian Seder Haters by Michael in 2022. So again, and I have said this, and people have said I'm full of it. Here is someone with a doctorate who is in the Messianic Jewish movement, who has much better bona fides and a better resume than I do, saying that exact same thing. That even though they have said they've moved away from one law, this teaching is still there, right? It's still mixed in, because the vision hasn't changed. I don't think it's sloppiness. I think it's on purpose. And I've noted elsewhere that Lancaster said, "Oh, this book has been updated since 2012 to remove that one law stuff." And I'm saying, "Holy cow! You changed it to make it less one law when I just got done reading this. That was restoration." And I was like, "It was worse before because it's all still there." All right, so let's get back to it. But again, I've been accused of not properly representing first fruits of Zion and saying that they believe things that they don't. They are what they're not. Dr. Rudolph is basically echoing what I've said. Again, not in every particular, but he's saying the same thing. So take it up with him. Don't harass the man. But I'm saying I'm not the only one. Dr. Solberg or Professor Solberg, he's not quite doctor yet. He's working on it. We're all seeing this the same way. Let's look at the continued from the quote. Dr. Rudolph picks it up. He says, while someone could say this teaching reflects an Acts 15 Jerusalem Council view because of the focus on freedom, that would be very generous. The overarching point or thrust of the appeal is to persuade Gentile believers that they should, ideally, be observing the Torah. And the writers couch the argument in the language of columns 2 and 3 to make it more attractive. And again, I have said this many times, that first fruits of Zion is teaching one thing and putting the window dressing of another. It's more attractive. It's more flies with honey than vinegar, right? They know that churches will have their radar up if you really say this stuff. So blend it in and scatter it around a bit. He says partial one law is scaled back from soft one law. So we had hard one law, soft one law, and the last is partial. And I would say since this paper came out in 2022, what are we looking at? August of 2022, First Fruits of Zion has said, we are now partial one law, right? So they've said we've moved to this space. I will once again say all of the hard one law stuff, all of the soft one law stuff, it's still there. And they're still selling these materials. They're still making money off of them. They're still for sale. They haven't walked away from them, not very hard. All right, so let's look at the quote. He says, what distinguishes partial one law from mainstream Messianic Judaism, which is what he is that partial one law holds that all Gentile Christians should observe the seventh-day Sabbath and festivals described in Leviticus 23. So it's about what you should do. Let's take a look at the footnote. And he references See International Alliance of Messianic Congregations and Synagogues, IAMCS, One Law, Two Sticks, a critical look at the Hebrew roots movement. Again, an awesome paper, and I've worked with that and used it, made a video about it. It's an excellent paper. It's from 2014, so it does need to be updated some to reflect the last 11 years in this movement, but what's there is excellent stuff. All right, and we got another Lancaster footnote. We're going to look at that one. As he says, picking it up here at 24, the biblical calendar is seen as God's universal ideal for Israel and the nations, and therefore Gentile believers ought to adopt these calendar celebrations. Again, I've heard so many times people say, these are the only festivals that God has ever given. These are the only days that God has ever made holy. No other ones count. In my experience, Dr. Rudolph says, excitement about calling the church to celebrate God's festivals is the engine that drives the soft and partial one law view. Yeah. Celebrating the festivals is a wedge. It gets the foot in the door when people have other intentions in mind, when they have a much bigger vision than that. And again, churches should, right, be willing to learn about these things, to talk about these things, to have a guest speaker in, whether that's someone from Jews for Jesus or One for Israel. Again, my church had such a speaker here about 11 years ago. It was awesome. It was a great night. We learned a lot. Nothing wrong with that. That's excellent. But Hebrew roots organizations like First Fruits of Zion, who do offer churches a Passover Seder experience, are using it to get soft and partial one law views in the door. And that is a big problem. Let's look at footnote number 25. We're almost to the end. It says, in other words, Lancaster in the Holy Days from 2016. And then Lancaster, Distinction, Theology, and Diversity in the Communities of Yeshua, 2019. And I don't know this other gentleman, Robert Heidler, so that we had one more. And then there's one more big footnote that we're going to basically end with after we take a look at this last page, because this is our last quote, and then the next section will be in part 2. It says, notably, many Gentile believers caught up in the Hebrew roots one law movement follow a common journey over the course of years in which their view shifts from hard one law to soft one law to partial one law, until finally concluding that the Acts 15 Jerusalem Council view best represents what the pillar apostles and Paul advocate in the New Testament. So I was fascinated by this line. Right, in part because I've seen the exact opposite movement, and I truly hope that Dr. Rudolph's own personal firsthand experience is the one that's more prevalent. I hope that more people that go far into this movement back off, and keep finding their way back toward orthodoxy, back towards what the New Testament teaches. But as we were talking about it in the podcast with Professor Solberg and Pastor Harris, we've seen the opposite. We've seen people go from excitement about the festivals to keeping kosher and the Sabbath, to leaving the church, to being part of one of these Hebrew roots groups, to eventually dropping the deity of Christ, dropping the Trinity, to eventually dropping Jesus altogether and joining Judaism. So we've seen, and so there's probably movement in both directions is what's true, right? There are folks that go in whole hog, they go in full, guns a-blazing, and then they realize, oh man, this is a mess, and they kind of back off it, and other people start slow and get further and further into it. In either case, there's an awful lot of movement because it's not a stable theology. That's the real reason. It's not biblical. It's not given by the Holy Spirit. It's not empowered by the Holy Spirit. So there's no stability here. It's going to be blowing to and fro by every wind of change, to borrow what Paul had to say. All right, let's take a look at that last footnote, and then we will stop here. It says, number 26, First Fruits of Zion, FFOZ, I use that shorthand all the time, has promoted all three kinds of one law theology. Since 1992, this flagship organization, again, he calls it a flagship organization. That's why I focus on it. Why in part I focus on it, because it's one of the most influential out there. Has zigzagged across the Hebrew roots one law spectrum, shifting from soft to hard to partial one law positions, kind of back and forth. First, it described its approach as divine permission. Then went harder, divine mandate, then went softer, divine invitation, and now divine distinction. And divine distinction is where they are now. Again, I say now because this could be out of date in a couple of years, given the last four steps. And then he, of course, has a ton of examples, many of which I have used and talked about. But again, 2012, 2013, 2016, 2020, and it has been a zigzag back and forth. And the point that I really find useful from him here is that they're all over the place, and they retain much of that one law vision. Even if the terms have changed. And he said it a lot more stridently in the 2021 version of this article. And so I want to read that from you. I can't pull it up online, but let me read it to you. He says, despite First Fruits of Zion's motto, Messianic Judaism for all nations, it's important to point out that the Messianic Jewish community and the Hebrew roots one law community are not synonymous. Again, I have said this till I'm blue in the face, and people have been mad about it, that First Fruits of Zion is not Messianic Judaism, they're Hebrew roots movement. And Dr. Rudolph has just shown you their teaching is on the Hebrew roots movement spectrum. Right? It's all over the place on that spectrum because it has never stood still, but it's always been on that spectrum because it's always been about Gentile Torah observance one way or another to one degree or another. All right, let me keep going with the quote. He says, the latter is a shadow movement of the former, and soft partial one law proponents like First Fruits of Zion try to make inroads into Messianic synagogues and Messianic Jewish organizations. Yeah, and they've been very successful at it, unfortunately. You're exactly right. And then this last quote, super important. He says, though First Fruits of Zion today denies being one law, its members use most of the one law arguments described below to win others to their communal vision. So the next section in the paper that we're going to talk about, part 2, are all of the arguments, and he's going to say basically why they're all not good. And he's just said, First Fruits of Zion uses these arguments. And they're the one law arguments, all right? And so he can see it. Also, excitement about calling the church to celebrate God's festivals is the engine that drives First Fruits of Zion and the rest of the Hebrew roots one law movement. So, I appreciate that. And I've had these papers for a while. I just have been focusing on things published by First Fruits of Zion. Probably should have brought this up earlier because it's nice to have someone who sees this the way that I do. Along with Dr. Solberg and Pastor Harris. Dr. David Rudolph is saying First Fruits of Zion is not Messianic Judaism. They are Hebrew roots. They're on the one law spectrum, back and forth, but they're on that spectrum. Despite, again, hear that quote again. It is so important. Proponents like First Fruits of Zion try to make inroads into Messianic synagogues and Messianic Jewish organizations. He's saying they're outsiders. They're not part of my movement. They're trying to get themselves here and trying to make people think they're part of it. That is powerful. And I very much appreciate him saying this. We'll dig into his teaching or his refutation of Hebrew roots teaching in the next section when I get a chance to make that one. I hope this was useful to you. I will put a link, of course, to the paper, to this Kesher Journal website so you can read it for yourself. Please read it for yourself, right? Read the whole thing, not just the parts that I'm highlighting. Look at all the footnotes because they're awesome footnotes. I love a good footnote. As a former English teacher, footnotes are where some of the most important things are hidden sometimes. And so I definitely read them. All right, and we'll pick it up next time. Appreciate good conversation. Thank you, and God bless.